Hello friends, I welcome you all to this class. I am Professor Varsha Mondada from Dr. Ambedkar Institute of Management Studies and Research. In this video, we will cover a short story by the name My Struggle for an Education by Booker T. Washington. Now before we get started with the story, let me tell you a few things about the writer. Booker T. Washington was a black man. He suffered from racial segregation. He was brought up in very adverse conditions. Washington struggled to get his education. But he developed his writing skills, and as a writer, he became famous first in America and then all over the world. In his literature, he talks about the miseries of life and what the society needs to develop. In this lesson, the writer describes his own life journey from a small village to a special school from where he desired to get his education from. Now let's look into the lesson. One day while at work in the coal mine, I happened to overhear two miners talking about a great school for colored people somewhere in Virginia. Colored people meaning the black people. So one day when Washington was at work in a coal mine, he happened to hear the conversation of two miners talking about a great school for the black people in Virginia. This was the first time that I had ever heard anything about any kind of school or college that was more pretentious than the little colored school in our town. Pretentious meaning attractive. So this was the first time that Washington had ever heard something about a school or college which was more attractive to him than any other school made for the colored people in his own town. As they went on describing the school, it seemed to me that it must be the greatest place on the earth. Now, as the two miners at the coal mine continued with their conversation describing the school, it seemed to Washington that it must be the greatest place on earth. And not even heaven presented more attractions for me at that time than did the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute in Virginia, about which these men were talking. Now, Washington is deeply interested in the institute. He says that even heaven will not attract him so much. He wanted to join the institute from his heart and soul. The institute had more attraction for him than the blessings of God. He believed that joining the institute will bring him more blessings than heaven could bestow upon him. So these lines show his occupation of mind for the institution. Now I resolved at once to go to that school. Resolved meaning decided. I resolved at once to go to that school, although I had no idea where it was or how many miles away or how I was going to reach it. He had no idea about how he would reach the school. But I remembered only that I was on fire constantly with one ambition, and that was to go to Hampton. This thought was with me day and night. He had no idea of how he would get there, but the only thing that he remembered was that he had to reach the school. He had faith, and he had full faith, and he had sincere desire in him to reach the school. He had made up his mind and had strong desires to reach the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute in Virginia. In the fall of 1872, I determined to make an effort to get there. My mother was troubled with a grave fear that I was starting out on a wild goose chase. Now his mother, she was worried, and she had anxiety. She was worried and had deep anxiety about her child going out and running after a wild goose chase, meaning something impossible. At any rate, I got only a half-hearted consent from her that I might start. Now, in those days, being a Negro was a crime, as they were looked down upon, and the white people never allowed the black people to prosper in life. So, His mother was not fully in favor of his going out and achieving something great in life. She was very doubtful about him achieving what he wanted to. And I had very little money with which to buy clothes and pay my traveling expenses. He was left with very little money to buy the necessary things for him and to pay his traveling expenses. My brother John helped me all that he could, but of course that was of not a great deal. His brother John had helped him, but it was of not a big help. Finally, the great day came and I started for Hampton. I had only a small satchel, cheap satchel that contained the few articles of clothing I could get. Finally, the day had come when he left for Hampton, and he carried along with him a small, cheap bag which contained some of his few necessary articles. Now, my mother at that time was rather weak and broken in health. His mother's health condition was very bad. I hardly expected to see her again. He had no hopes of meeting her again, and thus our parting was all the more sad, and that's why his parting from his mother was more sad. She, however, was very brave through it all. The distance from Malden to Hampton is about 500 miles. The distance that he had to travel from Malden all the way to Hampton was 500 miles. By walking, begging rides, both in wagons and in cars, in some way, after a number of days, I reached the city of Richmond, Virginia, about 82 miles from Hampton. Now, after a number of days of walking, begging rides, he finally reached the city of Richmond in Virginia, which was about 82 miles away from Hampton. When he reached there, he was tired, he was hungry, his clothes were dirty, and it was late in the night. I had never been in a large city, and this rather added to my misery. He had never had an opportunity to be in a large city, and this just added to his misery. When I reached Richmond, I was completely out of money. He was left with no money. I had not a single acquaintance in the place. He didn't know anyone in that place. And being unused to the city ways, I did not know where to go. I asked at several places for lodging, for accommodation, but they all wanted money. Everyone asked him for money, and that was what I did not have. Knowing nothing else better to do, I walked the streets. Because he was left with no money, he was left with no other choice but to walk down the streets. I must have walked the streets till after midnight, so all through the night he kept walking. At last I became so exhausted that I could walk no longer. I was tired, I was hungry, I was everything but discouraged. After walking for miles and miles, he became so exhausted that he could not walk any longer. He was tired, he was hungry, but he was not discouraged. He did not lose hope. Just about the time when I reached extreme physical exhaustion, I came upon a portion of a street where the broad sidewalk was considerably elevated. Now, the broad sidewalk was considerably elevated refers to the pavement, the platform that we see along the roadside. So he reached there, and I waited for a few minutes till I was sure that no passer-by could see me, and then crept under the sidewalk and lay for the night on the ground with my satchel of clothing for a pillow. Now, he had no comforts of life, and he knew that he could not expect for a bed for himself. So what he did, he just lay for the night on the ground with keeping his satchel as a pillow. Nearly all night I could hear the tramp of feet over my head. The next morning I found myself somewhat refreshed. When he woke up the next morning, after he had got some rest, he felt refreshed, but I was extremely hungry. As soon as it became light enough for me to see my surroundings, I noticed that I was near a large ship. So when he woke up, he noticed that he was near a large ship. It seemed to be unloading a cargo of pig iron. There were people who were unloading the cargo of raw iron, pig iron meaning raw iron. Now I went at once to the vessel and asked the captain to permit me to help unload the vessel in order to get money for food. Now he immediately went to the captain of the ship and asked him to allow him to work for him so that he could get some money for food. The captain was a white man who was very kind hearted, and he immediately accepted. I worked long enough to earn money for my breakfast, and it seems to me, as I remember it now, that to me to have been about the best breakfast that I have ever eaten. Now, the money that he had got after working for the captain, he used the money for buying some food for himself, and that seemed to have been the best breakfast that he had ever eaten. My work pleased the captain so well that he told me that I could continue working for a small amount per day. The captain was very happy with the way Washington worked, and so he agreed for him to continue working for him for a small amount of wage. Now this I was very glad to do. I continued working on this vessel for a number of days. He worked for a number of days, and he was very happy to do that. After buying food with my small wages, there was not much left to me, my way, not much left to pay my way to Hampton. He was not left with much money to make his way all the way to Hampton. Now, in order to economize in every possible way, I continued to sleep under the sidewalk. Because he wanted to save some money, he continued to sleep there on the roadside. When I had saved enough money with which to reach Hampton, I thanked the captain of the vessel for his kindness and started again. Now, once he realized that he had saved enough money to make his way to Hampton, he thanked the captain of the ship for his kindness, and he again started for Hampton. Without any unusual occurrence, I reached Hampton. Now, without much difficulties, he reached Hampton with a surplus of exactly 50 cents with which to begin my education. When he made his way to Hampton, when he reached Hampton, he was left only with 50 cents for him to start with his education. The first sight of the large 3-story brick school building seemed to have rewarded me for all that I had undergone in order to reach the place. The sight of it seemed to give me new life. Now, the first sight of the 3-story brick school building was so pleasing, was so rewarding, that he had forgotten all the failures and all the difficult times that he had gone through to reach the place, and it seemed to give him a new life. As soon as possible after reaching the grounds of the Hampton Institute, I presented myself before the head teacher for assignment to a class. As soon as he reached the institute, he went before the head teacher for the allotment to a class. Having been so long without proper food, a bath, and change of clothing, I did not, of course, make a very favorable impression upon her. Now, he had not had proper food for a long time. He had not taken bath, he had not changed his clothes were dirty, he was in a very shabby look, and that's why he knew that he had not made a very favorable impression upon the head teacher. but I could see at once that there were doubts in her mind about the wisdom of admitting me as a student. For some time she did not refuse to admit me, neither did she decide in my favor. She neither refused me nor she gave any reply. She kept me waiting. I continued to linger about her and to impress her in all the ways I could with my worthiness. In the meantime, I saw her admitting other students, and that added greatly to my discomfort. When Washington saw the head teacher giving admission to all the other students, now that made Washington uh, feel very uneasy, discomfort. I felt deep down in my heart that I could do as well as they if I could only get a chance to show that what was in me. Now, he felt that he could also prove himself, he could also prove his worthiness, but only if given a chance. After some hours had passed, the head teacher said to me, "The adjoining recitation room needs sweeping. Take the broom and sweep it." So, after some time of waiting, the head teacher asked Washington to sweep the adjoining room, the next room, and it occurred to me at once that here was my chance. Never did I receive an order with more delight. Now, Washington was very confident because he knew that he was good at it, and there was no other order which he had taken with more delight. I swept the recitation room 3 times. Then I got a dusting cloth and I dusted it 4 times. So Washington swept the room 3 times and he did the dusting for 4 times. All the woodwork around the walls, every bench, table, and desk, I went over 4 times with my dusting cloth. Besides, every piece of furniture had been moved, and every closet and corner in the room had been thoroughly cleaned. I had the feeling that in a large measure my future depended upon the impression I had made upon the teacher in cleaning of that room. Now he felt that cleaning this room would help him create a good impression on the teacher. When I was through, I reported to the head teacher. She was a Yankee woman. She was an American who knew just where to look for the dirt. She was a smart lady, and so she knew where to look for the dirt. She went into the room and inspected the floor and closets. Then she took her handkerchief and rubbed it on the woodwork, about the walls, and over the table and benches. When she was unable to find even a bit of dirt on the floor or particle of dust on any of the furniture, she quietly remarked that "I guess you will do to enter this institution." That Washington deserves. When she could not find any dust particles on the furniture, she understood that this little boy would do anything to get into the institution, and that he deserves to be given admission into the institution. I was one of the happiest souls on earth. The sweeping of that room was my college examination. I have passed several examinations since then, but I have always felt that this was the best one I ever passed. So Washington says that he was the happiest souls on earth because he was able to achieve what he desired for. The sweeping of the room was his examination. Students have to give various entrance examination, but uh, Booker T. Washington's entrance exam was sweeping of a room. Now, I have passed several examinations since then. He had passed several examinations, but then passing in the college examination was the best one he had ever achieved. So from this, the moral of the story is that sweet are the fruits of hard work. Challenges make it a man. Now, Washington was a black man, and from the story, we understand that for a downtrodden, it was a Herculean task to get higher education, which Booker T. Washington got it by his strong will, his hard work, and learning by whatever sources he had. Thank you.